somewhere in the beginning of the book, you give an important date. That date is 1865. Now, you mentioned that at the end of the American Civil War, only 1% of Americans were obese. Obviously, obesity was a rare thing.
Right.
0.5% of Americans died of cancer. And the most shocking for me was that diabetes rate was at hear this everyone, 0.0028%.
Diabetes.
There were no processed foods then. There were no vegetable oils. What happened just after the end of the American Civil War that changed our trajectory?
Yeah, so there's really 3 or 4 things, depending on how you want to classify them, but they together collectively became processed foods, or they are processed foods, or their presence in the food indicates that the food is processed. And those 4 things are sugar, refined flour, and trans fats. So of those, so sugar has been climbing for centuries in the United States and really across the world. It's a nutrient deficient food, but that's in primarily its only problem from my perspective. Seed oils entered the food supply right after the American Civil War. So beginning in basically 1866, seed oils entered the food supply at a very, very low level. And then we, because of the development of roller mill technology, we also got refined white wheat flour in 1880. And then beginning in 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco, which is basically trans fats, which was born out of hydrogenating or partially hydrogenating vegetable oils. So if we go back, though, the most critical issue here, in my view, and I think all of the evidence supports this, is that it was the vegetable oils that have so drastically changed our food supply. So yes, they were introduced in 1865, and they were introduced, they tried to introduce seed oils by selling them directly, but they didn't go over well because people were used to cottonseed oil being machine oil and lamp oil only. So manufacturers weren't really deterred by this, at least not for long. So they began to mix seed oils, cottonseed oil, with butter, and that's what became oleomargarine, which later was shortened to margarine, right? And so that began to replace butter. Then they began to adulterate olive oil in the 1870s with cottonseed oil, and we shipped tens of thousands of barrels to Europe. The French made complaint in 1880 that they had received 55,000 barrels, I believe it was, of what they knew was not pure olive oil. They were expecting to get pure olive oil coming out of California, but instead they could tell by the taste alone that it was adulterated. And so then in about 1907, Procter & Gamble, who were soap and candle makers, their business was drying up. The candle business was drying up because of the invention of electricity, or the use of electricity for light. And so they figured out how to make what they eventually called Crisco, which was partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, or in this case, it was cottonseed oil. And they introduced that in 1911. and soybean oil was introduced in 1909. And then we got all the other oils since then. So today, we have in the food supply, soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. Those are the oils which I would essentially classify as industrial seed oils. And altogether, the total vegetable oil consumption went from zero in America in 1865 to 80 grams per person per day by 2010. And this includes essentially the people consuming up to 80 grams a day don't need to add any vegetable oil to their food. In other words, most of those people don't even have vegetable oil at home. They're not using it at home. They're getting it from processed foods, restaurant foods, and fast foods. That's where they're getting their vegetable oil.
I brought up this passage from the book, and you clearly say seed oils themselves were born not out of a desire to benefit health, but mostly to undersell and outsell lard, butter, beef tallow, thereby turning big financial profits. Yeah, it was profitable.
Exactly.
And it still is profitable 100 years on because, of course, vegetable oils are comparatively much cheaper.
Yeah, they're very cheap. Yeah, obviously we'll get into all the disease ramifications, but just as of 2014, that's the latest data that I have on a global scale. Soybean oil sold for 1,000 grams. And so if you figure up that, Americans were consuming 80 grams per person per day in 2010, I determined the cost of that. If it was soybean oil, that's 5.6 cents worth of oil, which is supplying a third of their caloric consumption. So 720 calories worth costs of food manufacturers 5.6 cents. If you were to replace that with butter, on average, you would spend about six times as much, about 36 cents roughly, to use butter instead of seed oils.
I would like to share another chart, if you don't mind. So, okay. Anyway, let's talk about it. So you have a pie charts in the book. So comparing, I'll put this on the screen later on when I'm editing the video, from 1865, showing that 96% of food consumption was plant foods and animal foods. Processed food was only at 4%. And by processed foods, we're talking about refined sugars mainly back then in 1865. In 2009, 2009 processed foods were 63% of what people were consuming. And processed foods in 2009 included seed oils, sugars, refined grains, and trans fats. In fact, you also say in the book that that the FDA is lying the public about trans fats. So let's talk about so let's talk about that. But also, we need to make the point that it's not just seed oils, but also the combination, the deadly combination. You use the word deadly, I think, and deadly combo, the deadly combination of refined grains, sugars, and seed oils and trans fats. So